Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking the very latest psychological research and breaking down exactly why we choke under pressure and, more importantly, how to stop it. Seriously, if you've ever felt completely derailed by your own nerves right when it mattered most, you are in the exact right place.
Okay, let's kick things off with a pretty staggering statistic. Research shows that up to 60% of professional musicians and 40% of university students experience clinically significant performance anxiety. That is a massive chunk of people. It's incredibly common, yet so many of us just suffer in silence, right? We think it's just us, or we mistakenly try to brush it off as normal stress.
I mean, think about it. If you've ever felt your hands start shaking, your mouth go completely dry, or your mind just go totally blank right when you needed to perform, you really have to ask yourself, why? Why does your own body seemingly turn against you in those critical, high-stakes moments? Well, that is exactly what the science we're unpacking today is going to answer for us.
So to keep things simple, here's our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. Beyond just stage fright. 2. Inside the anxious brain. 3. The anatomy of choking. 4. Real-world high stakes. And 5. Taking back control.
All right, Section 1. Beyond just stage fright. The universal threat.
We really need to move way beyond the old myth of simple stage fright. You know, we aren't just talking about getting a few butterflies before a high school play here. It is a legitimate, deeply rooted psychophysiological condition. At its core, performance anxiety emerges from a perceived gap between the demands of whatever task you're facing and your own confidence in meeting those demands. Basically, the second your brain thinks the challenge is bigger than your capability, the alarms start sounding.
Moving on to Section 2. Inside the anxious brain, the vicious cycle.
Let's actually zoom in on the neurological mechanics to see what those alarms look like. It all kicks off with anticipation, right? And that triggers a physical arousal, like a pounding heart or sweaty palms. Now, if you start to catastrophize that feeling, your distress just skyrockets and ultimately tanks your performance. According to what's known as attentional control theory, that anxiety literally impairs your working memory. Your brain gets hijacked in one of two ways. The first is distraction, where your attention gets yanked outwards to external threats, like a frowning audience member. The second is self-focus, where your attention is pulled completely inward, obsessing over your own physical sensations or negative thoughts. And the kicker? Both of these completely drain the limited cognitive brain power you desperately need for the task at hand.
And this perfectly illustrates a concept called processing efficiency theory. Basically, anxiety plummets your processing efficiency, even if your actual performance on the outside stays high. So, you might power through and deliver a completely stellar presentation to your boss, but internally, your anxious brain is working so incredibly inefficiently that it leads straight to massive exhaustion and total burnout afterward.
Which brings us to Section 3, the anatomy of choking, when skills fail.
Okay, we need to make a really crucial distinction here. While anxiety is the internal state that you feel, choking is the actual behavioral outcome. It's that awful, paradoxical drop in performance even when you are highly motivated and highly skilled. So, science gives us two competing theories for why this happens. First, there's the explicit monitoring theory. This suggests that pressure makes you suddenly overanalyze a fluid, automated motion until it just breaks down. It's like a pro golfer suddenly overthinking every tiny granular angle of their swing. On the flip side, the distraction theory argues that your working memory is simply so full of worry that it can't function at all. But whichever way you slice it, both pathways lead to a catastrophic failure of your skills.
What's truly fascinating, and honestly a bit overwhelming, is the sheer scale of the symptoms involved here. I mean, we aren't just talking about a little bit of sweating. We're looking at severe somatic symptoms, things like psychogenic startle responses or intense neuromuscular tremors. Then there are the cognitive symptoms, like literal tunnel vision or memory retrieval failure where your mind just goes blank. Add in deep emotional dread and behavioral avoidance, like someone nervously tuning an instrument over and over again or endlessly fidgeting. It's a full-body takeover. The anxiety just hijacks the whole system.
All right, let's pivot to Section 4. Real-world high stakes, from the OR to esports.
Let's zoom out for a second and see how these intense symptoms actually play out in wildly different arenas in the real world. Because make no mistake, this impacts top-tier professionals absolutely everywhere. Think about an advanced concert pianist suffering from observer perspective imagery, literally visualizing their own embarrassing failure from the audience's point of view. Or a professional cricketer experiencing overwhelming waves of physical panic. It could be a surgeon experiencing dangerous microtremors in their hands. In fact, 20 to 30% of surgical trainees report severe anxiety, Or even an esports pro who starts fat-fingering their keyboard and completely loses their tactical adaptability under the glaring pressure of a live stream. The threat here is totally universal.
So here is a really crucial point. Whether you're a corporate CEO, a public speaker, or honestly, just anyone facing an audience, you have to recognize what psychologists call illusory transparency. This is that deeply mistaken belief that your internal panic is highly visible to everyone looking at you. But guess what? The reality is that audiences are actually terrible at detecting your internal anxiety. They really are. Just knowing that they cannot see your racing heart or your spiraling thoughts, well, that offers a massive, instant therapeutic reframe all on its own.
And that brings us to Section 5, Taking Back Control, Evidence-Based Solutions.
Okay, now that we deeply understand the mechanics behind the problem, let's get to the good stuff. How do we actually rewire our response to this pressure? Well, when you're in the middle of an acute episode of panic, cognitive behavioral therapy highly recommends immediate grounding techniques. A really effective one is box breathing. It's simple. You inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4, and then hold for 4 again. Doing this literally intercepts your autonomic nervous system and essentially forces your racing heart rate to slow right down.
Another incredibly powerful grounding tool you can use on the spot is the 5-4-3-2-1 sensory method. Here's how it works. You actively force yourself to identify 5 things you can see around you, 4 things you can physically feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. By doing this, you're literally forcing your brain out of that vicious internal loop of catastrophic thinking, and you're anchoring it firmly back into your immediate physical reality. It's a real game changer.
Now, moving beyond just acute grounding, creating a pre-performance routine is a fantastic way to dial down uncertainty before an event. But here's the catch. An effective ritual has to be idiosyncratic. That means it needs to be personally meaningful to you, not just some random superstition you picked up. It also has to be heavily repetitive, meaning you follow the exact same sequence every single time, and it must be action-focused. We're talking about specific physical warm-ups or movements, not just sitting there thinking about it.
Although, just a quick but super important investigative side note here, you really have to be careful where you get your scientific advice. A wildly famous 2016 study by Brooks and colleagues, which claimed that rituals decrease anxiety, was actually retracted because of data irregularities. Seriously. So when you're building out your routines, we absolutely must rely only on the rigorous peer-reviewed science that replaced it, like the 2018 Hobson studies. It just goes to show, you've always got to check the data.
We also have some pretty incredible insights coming from third-wave therapies, specifically acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT for short. Instead of chasing the totally impossible goal of symptom elimination, trying to entirely stop feeling anxious, which just doesn't work, ACT teaches this brilliant metaphor. They say, treat your anxious thoughts like unruly passengers on a bus. They can yell, they can make a ton of noise in the back, but you do not have to let them drive the bus. You commit to the action anyway.
Now, for the more profound or chronic cases out there, top performers are leaning into some truly incredible advanced interventions. We're talking heart rate variability biofeedback, where people literally visualize and control their own nervous system on a screen. There's also virtual reality exposure therapy, using VR to simulate terrifying stadiums or high-pressure surgical theaters in a totally safe environment. And then, under strict medical supervision, of course, things like beta blockers, which can actually silence the physical tremors and racing heart rate without sedating the mind.
So we've walked through the vicious cycle of anxiety, the literal mechanics of choking, and we've unpacked a powerful arsenal of evidence-based tools that can transform that debilitating panic into manageable and maybe even energizing action. So the only question left to wrap up this explainer is this. Armed with all this science, will you let the pressure control you, or will you use these tools to channel it, step up, and fuel your next high-stakes performance?